So if you recall, last time we were together, we spent some time developing the idea that, kind of contrary to the strand of thought that appears among the church fathers in Christianity, that property ownership and wealth accumulation is, by its very definition, a sinful, bad thing. Judaism doesn't believe that. Judaism believes that accumulating wealth, that ownership of property is something which is inherently, at least has the potential for good. It is an actualization of one's divine image in which we were created, or with which we were created, and presents an opportunity to be able to further actualize that divine image by doing things that God would want us to do with that property. That doesn't in any way compromise or limit or dismiss the degree to which I own that property. It is rather a charge, a command even, we would go so far as to say, to do certain things with that property. Now the distinction, the difference between those two explanations is the extent to which the authorities have power over us to allow or to make us forfeit our ownership over those things. And if so, if they do have that power, how are we to understand that? And that's what I would like to talk about today, kind of as a natural segue to what we were talking about last week. How do we understand? Because to be sure, and as we noted at the end last week, to be sure, there are institutions that exist within halacha and within halachic society that mandate, and yes, we can use that word, that mandate the forfeiture of our wealth, our property, our stuff, and the giving of it to others. What are some of those things?
The Jubilee.
So we mentioned last week the concept of the Jubilee year, right? In the 50th year, my land is taken from me.
The Maaser and the Truma.
Excellent. The tithing process that we have, we take our produce and we give it to the Kohen, to the Levi, and in some, depending on the year, where there's a 7-year Shemitah cycle, in the 3rd year and in the 6th year, right, it's a 7-year Shemitah cycle, but it's actually 2 mini 3-year cycles, where in years 1 and 2 and in years 4 and 5, the second tithe that I take is brought to Jerusalem and eaten there. In year 3 and in year 6 of those 3-year mini cycles, that second tithe is actually given to the poor. And the 7th year, of course, is Shemitah, where nothing is done. But be that as it may, we see certain institutions, whether it's tithing, whether it's the Jubilee year, we see certain institutions which seem to, at least on some level, limit the degree to which I own things, right? How could, if I own something absolutely, completely, how could the authorities mandate that I do something with it? It's mine, right? So if everything we said last week is true, that ownership is a good thing, accumulation of wealth is not inherently a bad thing, and is absolute, I really do own something, right? And we celebrate that, we embrace it. If that's the case, what does it mean that I have an obligation to give? An obligation, I am mandated to give. How do we understand that? There's actually another institution that
Taxes and death you can't get away from.
Taxes and death. So exactly. So, but still, even though we do have the notion of taxes does exist, how do we look at that, right? I think it was Joe Biden once said, giving taxes is patriotic, right? So while we may not necessarily look at the money that I give to the IRS that way, right? Is there a conception? Is there an approach under which we might look at our halachic taxes in that sort of way? So that's what I want to explore. Yeah.
I heard a funny joke.
Okay.
Sanders wants to tax people 90% and then you tithe for 10%. So that
You're left with nothing. Right. Okay, so we'll see what happens. Either way, there's another institution that actually also appears to limit my ownership of things, and that is, this is actually part of our 9th grade Gemara curriculum, so if you have children or grandchildren that have gone through the 9th grade in SAR, they certainly may, or at least should be, familiar with this concept, and that is called Kofin al Midat Sdom. Literally, that translates to, we enforce regarding the trait of Sdom. What does that mean? We enforce regarding the trait of Sdom. What this means is that an owner's unwillingness. Let's say for argument's sake, let's say I need your help, and I ask for your help regarding a particular area, a particular matter, and you're unwilling to help me. So sometimes an owner's unwillingness to help another person is overridden by a court of law. The authorities can force you to help someone else, provided it doesn't cause a loss, a financial loss to you. So let's say, for argument's sake, I need a place to stay, okay? And since I need a place to stay, I knock on your door, and I know you have a guest bedroom, right? And I ask to stay in your guest bedroom. Unless you can concretely, persuasively find a reason why I shouldn't stay in your house, which may be. There may be a good reason why you don't want me there. That you have guests coming that need that space. It was just painted and you want it to remain fresh and new. Whatever outlandish reason you could come up with. But if you don't have a reason to help me out, you can't just say no because you want to be a rotten guy. All right? So that's called kofin. Kofin, the word kofin means to coerce. We coerce you regarding the midah, the trait of Sdom. Because what the Sodomites did was the classic Sodomite was a jerk just for the sake of being a jerk, right? So halacha doesn't allow that. You can't be a jerk just for the sake of being a jerk. If you have a compelling reason why you want to say, that's fine. But the authorities force you to be a nice person. That's what kofan amidat Sdom means. One classic, this is not totally our topic, but I'll give you an example, that the Talmud uses or employs this concept. Let's say there are a group of three brothers, and a group of three brothers inherit an estate from their father, right? And it just so happens that one of the plots of real estate that is bequeathed to these three brothers happens to be adjacent to a field that I own. My father leaves us a whole conglomerate of real estate, holdings, and it just so happens that one of them is next to a plot of land that I own. I naturally want my third of the pie to include that because it's more convenient for me, right? And the Talmud presents a case where the two other brothers say no. There's no good reason for them to say no. They just, they want to be stubborn, so they say no, right? Says the Gemara, according to one opinion there, in the beginning of Masechet Bava Batra, Kofin al midat Sdom, we force the brothers, right, to not be a jerk and to allow my third of the inheritance to include that plot of land. Because I'm the bar metzra, I'm the neighbor of that plot of land. There's no good reason why they wouldn't give it to me. So that's Kofin al midat Sdom, where it seems your ownership, your dominion, your control over your property is limited by what you can do. So, for that reason, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, in source number 1 on your page, in the context of an article, in the midst of an article where he writes, explaining the concept of Kofin amidat Sdom, actually says, coercion over the trait of Sdom completely contradicts the widespread idea that man is the supreme ruler of his possessions, that his property is his to do with as he pleases. As long as it is not causing damage to another person, no one can hinder him. Right? Jewish law has a different spirit to it. In Jewish law, there is almost none of the aversion to private property that the church fathers expressed, but Jewish law never idolized this concept, and other moral necessities may occasion its limitation. Though Jewish law is extremely removed from Proudhon's statement that property is theft, on the other hand, it refuses to agree with the popular expression that an Englishman's home is his castle. We must differentiate between ownership for the sake of usage and ownership for the sake of sovereignty. We must agree with the first statement and condemn the latter. So Rav Lichtenstein seems to be understanding that this notion of Kofin amidat Sdom, together with some of the other things we discussed, Yovel, Shemitah, Meiser, Truma, and the big one, which we're going to discuss mostly today, which we briefly mentioned at the end yesterday, but which is the mother of all mandates, requirements, which seem to limit my absolute ownership, which is the mitzvah of. I have a mitzvah to do what with my money? To give? Charity, okay? So if I have a mitzvah to give charity, how could it mean that I own absolutely, right? I don't have a choice. It's a mitzvah. Just like it's a mitzvah for me to hear lulav to shake lulav on Sukkot and eat matzah on Pesach and put on my tefillin every morning. I have a mitzvah to give tzedakah. It's not a choice, right? So it's not a choice. How could it, right? So Rav Lichtenstein is explaining that the concept of kofin appears to limit the degree to which I fully, absolutely own my items, my property. So we want to discuss exactly how to navigate what we discussed last week with these concepts, these halachot. Okay? Any questions before we move on?
I just want to share something with you.
Sure.
My children had you, and they learned something. They learned from you a lot. My daughter's a good fan. And my son taught me something.
Okay.
He got it from you. I used to pick up coins. If I saw a coin that was abandoned,
Okay.
I'd pick it up, and especially as we felt on harder times, it was more important for me to pick up these coins. And one day he not in front of anybody, he took me aside. He said very gently, you shouldn't do that. I said, why? He said, because there's somebody who needs that one. You can think of it like if you leave something in your field, which you have to feel you're required to leave something for the poor. There's always somebody who's more poor than you, so you have to leave it to that person. You're taking it from somebody.
Interesting. Okay.
I thought that was really something.
It's a very sensitive young man. Yitzi's a good guy. I like him.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I want to thank you for helping.
My pleasure. I don't know if that's those sorts of things come much more from home than they do from school. But thank you. Anyway, please send them my best, the both of them. So I'd like to spend some time today talking about how we understand the notion of social welfare in Tanakh, in the Talmud, and in Halacha, in the history of Halacha as it's sort of developed. So as we noted, the concept of social welfare in Talmudic law does rest heavily on the agricultural / social commandments that exist. There's a lot of ink spilt in the Torah and in the Talmud, right, on agricultural tithing and charity giving and social welfare. Parts of my produce, parts of my land, parts of my estate that I have to give to the poor. There's a lot of that, right? There's very little in the Torah, very little, save for a few psukim, which we're going to see in just a little bit, dedicated to a commandment to give money to poor people. That appears in the Torah, at least, to be of much lesser significance than the giving of my produce, the giving of my stuff, rather than my money, right? Just in terms of weighing the treatment that the Torah gives to these two things, clearly the Torah puts greater emphasis on agricultural giving, on produce giving, on the agricultural social welfare programs, commandments, than they do on tzedakah. There's almost no commandments in the Torah to give charity beyond the giving of one's agricultural produce. Yeah?
But that's probably because the climate at the biblical time was not a monetary area. There was no money there.
Excellent.
Really. Money was
very good.
You needed a king to make
right.
money. And
So excellent, very good. So if you look at source number 3 on the page, those 4 verses. Sorry, it's on page 2. But if you look at source number 3 on the page, those 4 verses are the only 4 verses in the Torah dedicated to a mitzvah to give tzedakah, and actually the context in which the Torah gives that mitzvah is a different context entirely. The context of giving a loan, what the Torah says is that don't hesitate to loan money to a poor person because, well, we know what's going to happen. What's going to happen? What happens every 7 years? The loans are forgiven. So this is actually, the Torah very rarely does this. The Torah creeps into the mind of a person and says, well, I understand the Torah says that you might say that, well, here's a destitute person. I don't want to lend them money because in short order, that loan is going to be canceled. So why would I want to lend that person money? Says the Torah, you got to lend that person money, right? You don't have a choice. The same requirement you have to lend your brother, your neighbor who's well-to-do money, you got to lend the poor people money as well. And in that context, in verses 7 and 8 in chapter 15 of Sefer Dvarim, the Torah says that if there happens to be a poor person among you, you should open your hand to them and you should give them the money that they need. You should surely lend them sufficient money for that which he is lacking. The Torah, the phrase the Torah uses is Havet tavitenu, lend them money. Okay. Patoach tiftachet yadcha lo, you should open your hand. But it doesn't say give. The initial formulation is that you should lend them the money. Okay? So charity, even as we know it, charity isn't as direct as we would have appreciated, right? We would have appreciated the Torah saying, give money to poor people. But it doesn't say that. The Torah says, when someone needs money, you should be willing to lend them money, right? You should be willing to lend them money, okay? Now, if I were to ask you, if I woke you up in the middle of the night, I use that phrase with my students all the time, but if I woke you up in the middle of the night and I asked you, what I mean by that is your instinct. Instinctively, what would you say? When you hear that what the Torah tells me is that you should lend money to poor people and not hesitate in doing so, rather than saying there's a mitzvah of tzedakah. What does that tell you? What's the purpose of tzedakah?
Well, that when you lend the money, the person still has dignity because he knows that in time he'll pay it back. When you give tzedakah to poor people, sometimes there's a feeling on the part of the poor person of being somehow inferior or needy and
Okay, very good. So the dignity of the receiver, okay? But the Torah is not talking to the receiver now. Who's the Torah talking to? The lender, the giver, right? It tells me, well, any other suggestions?
But I think,
Yeah.
A person's true character is revealed on, I guess, 3 occasions: when they're drunk, when they're angry, and when you ask them for money.
Yeah.
So the Torah understands that if you're waking up in the middle of the night and you're ordered to give money to somebody, it's going to be harder for you than if you're ordered to lend money to somebody, because there's a possibility you'll get it back.
Right.
So I think it's an understanding that, it may be harder for you to instantly and without any hesitation give.
That is true.
Yeah.
But the Torah, the only way I would push back and say, the Torah is almost acknowledging here
That you may not get it
that
back.
you're not going to get it back, or at least you very likely won't get it back,
Very likely
right?
won't get it back.
So, and nonetheless, in other words, the Torah, it's built in, the Torah says that after 7 years the loan is forgiven. So you don't have a choice in that matter. But nonetheless, you should still give. So you might not get the money back. You might, but you also might not. So to me, what this looks like is the concept of tzedakah, as it's portrayed, as it's phrased in the Torah, we briefly alluded to this last week. The notion of tzedakah, the mitzvah of tzedakah, is not one which is about redistribution, leveling the playing field, economic justice, okay? It's about taking care of people, right? People who are less fortunate. It's about restoring or lifting up, raising up the impoverished from their state of misery, okay? And we do that in the best way possible, right? So overt tzedakah, in fact, there's a strong strand of thought in halacha and Jewish thought. We don't like to take handouts. Soni matanos yichya, the pasuk says, right? The person who hates gifts, who hates presents, that person will live, right? So on some level at least, right, the concept of a loan is the most pristine form of charity. Because what it is it's the fulfillment of a moral obligation. And that's what I want to focus on today. The concept of tzedakah as a moral obligation and not as a legal one, okay? We tend to think of tzedakah, charity, as I have, that person doesn't have, right? Let's tip the scales a little bit, right? Let's bring things to balance a little bit more, right? That notion doesn't appear to have very strong footing in halacha. Let's take a look at the first page, the Rambam. Go ahead.
The concept of a loan would seem to be possibly, I don't know how this really works, but if you're going to be giving away 10% of your income, it seems to me loans don't come in that. Maybe they're supposed to, but a loan is a commercial transaction, and lots of times people make loans, and if you always thought every loan wasn't going to be repaid, there would be no commercial dealings. So it may be that this is another way of saying this is not a form of tzedakah. Right.
It's actually good. It's good you make that point, because I think there's kind of a paradox in that sense, because we do the theory we're going to develop today, that we began to develop a little bit last week, is that tzedakah is not a loan. In other words, when I think of a loan, I think of a legal transaction. I lend you money, right, and you have to pay me back. Your obligation to pay me back the money is directly related to our relationship. The fact that I lent you money, it's a relationship between you and me. The reason why I give tzedakah to a poor person is not because I owe them the money, right? It's because it has nothing to do with them and everything to do with me, right? I have a moral obligation to take care of those less fortunate than I. That's what it means to be Mizera Avraham Avinu, to be the children of Avraham Avinu. It means I don't think about myself, I think about others, right? That's what it means to be Jewish. It means to be Jewish to think about other people, especially those that are in need. So it's not that you don't have and therefore I owe you money, right? That's not what it's about. It's about something kind of broader than that. And with that, it's a perfect segue into the treatment of the Rambam. I wish we had time to go through a lot of sources that kind of convey this, but we're going to stick with the Rambam and a few other select sources that I think kind of drive this home. The Rambam formulates or codifies the laws of charity almost as an addendum to Hilchot Matnot Aniyim. Well, it's called Hilchot Matnot Aniyim, right? The laws of charity to the poor, gifts to the poor. Hilchot Matnot Aniyim appears in what book of the Rambam? The Rambam's Mishnah Torah, his code of Jewish law, had 14 books, and he categorized, he organized all of the corpus of Talmudic law, all of halacha, into kind of a very organized, put together, neat, almost sort of package. Because the Talmud is all over the place, right? You're learning Masechet Psachim, which is about Pesach, and you get to like pages and pages of ritual purity and impurity. You're learning the Masechet Menachot, which is about the meal offering, the grain offering that was brought in the temple, and you get to like pages and pages of the laws of Sefer Torah and Tefillin and Mezuzah. It's like, what are these things doing there? So the Rambam did a great service for us, and what he did was, he took the entire corpus of Talmudic law and organized it in a very neat, clean, organized sort of way. So when you're learning, the reason why this is important is not because it's easy to find things, but when you're learning something in the Rambam, it's not only important what the Rambam says, but it's also important where he says it. So the mitzvah of tzedakah, the Rambam puts, Hilchot Matnot Aniyim, he puts in Sefer Zraim, the laws of agriculture. Because for the Rambam, as for us, as we've already mentioned, many of these laws really are rooted in, are agricultural in nature. Be that as it may, the last chapter of Hilchot Matnot Aniyim is dedicated to discussing the mitzvah of tzedakah, kind of on a bigger scale. And in Perek Yud, Halacha Aleph, source 2 says the Rambam, Chayavinanu lihizaher b'mitzvat tzedakah yoter mikol mitzvot aseh. We are obligated to be careful with regard to the mitzvah of charity to a greater extent than all other positive commandments. Why? Now, okay? If tzedakah were about distributive justice, were about leveling the playing field, were about giving someone something that we owe, what should the want them to have? Okay? But what does the Rambam say? The Rambam focuses purely in his talk about why tzedakah is so great on the giver. Shahat tzedakah siman letzadik, right? Because charity is a siman, it's an identifying characteristic of a tzaddik. The words tzedakah and tzaddik have connection with, right? Obviously they come from the same root, right? Zera Avraham Avinu. You want to be a righteous person? You want to be someone who is from the seed, a descendant of Avraham Avinu? You got to give tzedakah. That is a defining quality, character trait of the children of Avraham Avinu. And he quotes a verse to prove this, right? Next line. Ve'ein kisei Yisrael mitkonein v'dat ha'emet omedet ela b'tzedakah. Right? The throne of Israel will not be established, and dat emet will not. Right? True faith cannot stand except with the mitzvah of charity. Right? Ve'ein Yisrael nigalin ela b'tzedakah. And redemption will only come about as a result of tzedakah. So here we have the reasons the Rambam is giving you why tzedakah is so great. And he doesn't even mention at all because someone needs you, right? Because there's someone who's in a state of need. Because there's someone who doesn't have and we want to give. Why is the Rambam so hyper-focused on the giver? The reason why tzedakah is so great is because you want to be from the children of Avraham Avinu. You want to be, because tzedakah is the pillar of faith, right? Tzedakah brings about the redemption, right? What about the fact that there's someone who doesn't have, and we want, the point for the Rambam is, I think, what the Rambam is trying to establish, what we have kind of been able to intuit up until this point, is that tzedakah is less a legal obligation and more a moral obligation, a religious one, right? Because when you're a Jew, you take care of other Jews. When you're a member of a family, you take care of the other members of your family. That is a moral obligation. When your brother shows up on your doorstep and needs help, it doesn't matter how far astray that brother has gone. It doesn't matter what they've done in their life, right? You're going to help them because family's family. And that's a moral obligation. That's not a legal one, right? If we draw a circle around the entirety of the people of Israel, and we're one, very often we tend to think about other Jews as like our, co-religionists. And it's not really the most apt or most precise way of describing the relationship. Our fellow Jews are our brothers and sisters, and that's kind of where a lot of these obligations flow from. It's a moral obligation to create a kind of a society where people are taken care of. Take a look at Halacha Bet. In Halacha Bet, the Rambam says, "Le'olam ein adam me'ani min tzedakah." A person will never become impoverished from giving charity. Ve'ein davar ra v'lo hezek niglal b'shvil hatzedakah. Nothing bad will ever happen to a person from giving tzedakah. Shenemar, etc., etc. Anyone who has mercy, mercy will be had on them. Shenemar, etc., etc. If you're cruel and you're stubborn and you don't give tzedakah, we have a right to question whether you are in fact from the children of Avram Avinu. She'ein ha'achzariyut mitzuya ela ba'akum. Slightly politically incorrect, but the Rambam says cruelty is not a trait of the children of Avram Avinu. If you're a cruel person, you're most likely from the idol worshippers, right? That's what the Rambam says, right? You're most likely from one of the other nations. Because kindness, decency, is a quality that is inherent, that is innate in the children of Avram. If you don't have it, okay, we have a right to call into question whether you are in fact from the children of Avram Avinu. Very profound, very deep, if slightly politically incorrect, statement of the Rambam. Then take a look at the underlined portion, and this is where I think we kind of, the rubber hits the road. V'chol Yisrael v'hanilva aleihem ke'achim heim. Every single Jew and those who attach themselves to them are as brothers. Shene'amar banim atem l'Hashem Elokechem. The verse says, "You are the children of the Lord your God." V'im lo yirachem ha'ach al ha'ach, mi yirachem alav. What a beautiful formulation. Because if a brother doesn't have mercy on another brother, who's going to have mercy on him? If a brother can't take care of a brother, who can take care of anyone? Right? Right? Because after all, where are the impoverished, the poor of Israel? Who are they going to turn to? Are they going to turn to the idol worshippers, the nations of the world that hate them, that are chasing after them? That's who they're going to turn to. Obviously, we should appreciate and understand the climate in which the Rambam is writing and speaking. Okay, we're talking 12th century Europe, which was not kind to the Jews. The Rambam was on the run. Okay, so it's obvious that where do you turn when you need help? You turn to your brother. This sort of formulation is not a leveling the playing field sort of formulation. This is a moral rectitude sort of formulation. I have a responsibility towards my brother, and therefore I have to take care of him. Not because he doesn't have and I do, but because he needs me. And because he needs me, I have to take care of him. That's how the Rambam formulates the mitzvah to take care of the poor. And we should also point out, by the way, I forgot to mention this, and then we'll get back to the Rambam, because I think the Halacha Yotet, Halacha 19 in chapter 10 is the Rambam's, closing statement, if you will, in Hilchos Matnos Aniyim. We're going to get to that in just a second. We should also point out, similar to what was mentioned before, that another reason why there may have been less of a focus on charity giving and more of a focus on agriculture is because of the changing society. It could have been that up until the times of the Talmud, the Mishnah and the Talmud, it was sufficient to provide for the poor to merely have these agricultural laws. They lived in an agrarian society. But with the advent of Hellenistic culture and the advent of urban centers, which had never existed before, with the creation of that sort of kind of framework, the rabbis of the Talmud had to adapt. So they created, or at least further emphasized and underscored, the concept of tzedakah, which perhaps didn't exist up until this point. So we should also point that out. Anyway, back to the Rambam, because we're kind of developing the Rambam's view. This last chapter of Hilchot Ma'anot Aniyim, according to the Rambam, tzedakah is a moral obligation to take care of your brother. Every Jew is our brother. Everyone who attaches themselves to the Jews are our brothers and sisters, and therefore when we're family, we take care of each other. We have a moral responsibility to take care of each other. And here closes the Rambam with the following remarkable comment. The Rambam in his closing, his closing remarks establishes three different groups of people. There are three categories of people with respect to tzedakah. Category number one, or at the bottom of the page 1, Kol mi she'eino tzarich litol u'merameh et ha'am v'notel. Okay? Anyone who does not need to take tzedakah and deceives the people and takes, eino meit min hazikna ad she'itzarich labiot. Such a person will not reach old age. Such a person will have to be waited on. Will have to be waited on by others in order to provide for their needs. Such a person won't be able to take care of themselves. They're not going to reach old age. It's a very bad thing to deceive society and take tzedakah where you don't need it. Okay? Cursed be the person who places their lot, their trust in another person. Okay? To the exclusion of God, of course. Category number 2. V'chol mi shetzarich litol ve'eino yachol lachayot ela im kein notel. What is category number 2? Someone who needs tzedakah to live. Someone who cannot sustain themselves without charity. Kigon zakein, o choleh, o bal yisurin, such as a elderly person, or a sick person, or someone who's been afflicted with injuries or whatever. Umegis daito ve'eno notel. But you know what? They're too proud. They're too prideful. They're too, arrogant almost to take the money that they need. Hareza shofech damim mitchayav benafsha. Wow, right? Such a person, it's as if they're murdering themselves, right? If you're too proud to take what you need to live from somebody else, it's your fault, right? You are liable for your own life, okay, in that situation. You're like a shofech damim, you're a murderer, okay? By the way, we should also point out that because this theme appears throughout Jewish thought and halacha, we sometimes have the misconception that our lives are our own to do what we wish with them, and our bodies are our own to do what we wish with them, and that's not true. We have a responsibility to keep ourselves healthy, to take care of ourselves and our bodies, and maintain our health, because it's ultimately at the end of the day our soul, our body was a gift from God, and we have to treat that gift in the right sort of way. Yeah.
Is there any place where there is not a responsibility for to give to non-Jews who are in need?
So, yes. The short answer to your question is yes. But I think the way halacha is formulated and conveyed and halacha projects a sort of attitude that every poor person needs to be taken care of. But the simple fact of the matter is, when my brother needs me, and a complete stranger needs me, I'm going to take care of my brother. Not only am I going to take care of my brother, I don't even think I need to justify that or even explain that, right? So a lot of times I think halacha gets accused of being discriminatory or racist or tribal, and those accusations are serious, and we should deal with them. I think something that's helpful in dealing with those accusations, or those criticisms, is to shift our focus in terms of how we view the Jewish people and the interrelationship between Jews. It's not that I practice the same religion as you, but it's that we're siblings, we're family. And if we're family, it makes sense that we treat each other differently. It makes sense that we treat each other differently. So the default, the conventional common practice is not how you and I treat each other, it's how I would treat the complete stranger. So when the Torah says, for example, you may not charge interest to your fellow Jew, but you may charge interest to a non-Jew, which of those two things is normal, which of those two things is abnormal? Which is normal? To charge interest. We live in a capitalist society, right? We're talking about capitalism, right? Maybe next week we'll talk a little bit about interest, okay? It makes sense to charge interest. That's not wrong. That's not problematic. And if that's not, so what needs explaining is why Jews can't charge interest to each other, not why a Jew can charge interest or may charge interest to a non-Jew. And the answer is, because you don't charge your brother interest when you lend them money, right? That's preposterous. That's absurd, right? So I think those sorts of mentalities are often helped, not always, and very often we're still left struggling with kind of the way halacha treats Jews and non-Jews differently. But as a kind of a small, helpful way to begin to think about these things, if we treat the Jewish people as a family and less as a religion, a lot of times that helps it. The Torah there's no word in the Torah that means religion. That word almost doesn't exist in the Torah. When we talk about Judaism, we only in the Torah and really in the Bible, in the entire Tanakh, we only talk about the Jewish people. Yes, to be part of the Jewish people, to be part of that family, there are certain expectations, like any family, right? Every family has certain expectations. When you're a part of this family, you have to fill in the blank, okay? Come to dinner, all right? Eat your vegetables, right? So there are obviously certain requirements that come with being a part of the family, but the Torah, the Tanakh, speaks about Judaism in the context of a people, of a nation, of a family, not in the context of a religion. I think that sometimes gets lost on us. Okay, now let's return to the Rambam and Halacha Yotet in the Rambam. Okay, I see we're not going to have time to finish everything, but you'll take a look at some of these sources on your own. Many of them are quite fascinating. Halacha Yotet. Kol mi she'eno tzarich litol. We did that already. See, yeah. Thanks for reminding me. I'm glad I have you here. I'm just checking.
I listened.
I'm just checking to see if someone's listening. Okay, very good. Okay, so category number 2, which we're in the middle of discussing, was someone who needs tzedakah and doesn't take it. Okay, that person is a murderer. Ve'ein lo b'tzaro ela chataot v'hashamot. What does a person have to show, according to this analysis? What does a person have to show for all of their hardship?
Sin and guilt.
Chataot v'hashamot, sin and guilt. Okay, right? When you need taken care of, you have to agree to, right? You're not above being helped. That's the kind of the lesson the Rambam gives. And now, here it is, the third category. The last group of this is remarkable, right? Just to put it in context. The Rambam's last words in the laws of charity. This is it, right? You would think it's something resounding, something about the importance of tzedakah, something about what it means to give tzedakah, the relationship between the giver and the receiver. And instead, the Rambam tells us a law about someone who refuses tzedakah. Look at this. But kol mi shetzarich, who's the greatest of all? Kol mi shetzarich litol, someone who needs the money. V'tzi'er, v'dachak et hasha'ah, v'chayach chayei tza'ar k'dei shelo yatriach al hatzibor. A person who needs the money, or at least who could use the money. But you know what? They relent, and they persevere, and they're willing to live a life of hardship and difficulty and sometimes pain and misery so as not to overburden the community for having to take care of them. I'm not editorializing here, I'm just translating the words, okay? Such a person will live to old age and will merit to actually have the opportunity to take care of others from their estate, from their wealth. Ve'alav, and on such a person, ve'al kol kayotze bezeh, and on any similar type of person. I want to get back to that phrase in a second. The Rambam doesn't, waste words. What does that mean, on anyone similar like that? What is it about this person and people like them? Nemar, baruch hagever sheivtach b'Hashem, right? Blessed is the person who places their trust in Hashem. Okay, that is the end of Hilchot Tzedakah. So it obviously can't. So what is this telling me? What is this last line telling me?
You don't rely on other people entirely.
Right, exactly.
You can't do that.
Now, it obviously doesn't mean that relying on other people per se is bad. Why?
Because we do. We're supposed to.
Well, what was the thing he just said before that?
If you fail to take it, you need it, then you're...
If you need it to live and you fail to take it, you're a murderer. So obviously taking per se is not a bad thing. But if you can do without it, you need it, but you can do without it, and you're willing to persevere and live a more difficult life than you otherwise would have, that's the best type of person. What is that person willing to do? Willing to do, really, again, this is the Rambam's closing words of the laws of tzedakah. Willing to do what? Willing to do to really embody and personify what the laws of tzedakah are all about. The greatest giver of tzedakah is actually someone who, wait, were you pointing to God or?
Well, yeah, because if you're relying on Him, you're going to be okay.
Right. So, and it's not just that. It's not just that you're relying on God. In refusing the money, because the Rambam is explicit, why does this person refuse the money?
They don't want to overburden the community. They're putting the community ahead of their own individual
Exactly,
needs.
right? Because really, what the consummate giver of tzedakah, the person who most properly brings the what's the proper attitude to tzedakah? I'm taking care of others.
Right.
Okay? So that mentality, that attitude, that approach can be embodied, can be personified, not just by someone who gives tzedakah,
Someone who declines
even
it.
someone who declines it when they need it, right? And that, to a certain extent, is the most pristine form of tzedakah. Because what tzedakah is all about is less about the money that's changing hands, and much more about a moral rectitude, a kindness, a decency, a willingness to put others before yourself. This is the closing salvo, if you will, in Hilchos Tzedakah, because such a person is really the greatest of all. I need the money. I could use the money. But you know what? It doesn't belong to me. It's not mine. I don't have a right to it. And so I'm going to let others have it.
He's indirectly giving tzedakah in this way.
Exactly.
He can't afford to do it in the first instance, so this is an indirect way of doing it.
Exactly. Since I don't need it, I could use it. But since I don't need it, I don't want to overburden the congregation. Okay? Like Yitzi said, all right? The money's there, okay? Right? We don't need it, right? Even though we've fallen on hard times. The fact of the matter is, I don't want to, quote unquote, overburden the community. Let it go to someone else who really needs it, okay? So the concept of tzedakah as a moral institution is about thinking about myself less and thinking about others more, right? And that can be embodied and personified not just by the giver, but by the potential receiver as well. And that's, I think, what the Rambam is telling us in this final line. It's really a deep and profound idea. Okay. Now, let's spend the rest of our time talking about coercion. Because, as we mentioned, I wanted to spend the bulk of our time developing that Rambam. But really, tzedakah was subject to coercion, right? It was true. And it really, so much so we can even, taking a look at sources 4 and 5, the Talmud in Sanhedrin says, in a Braita, Kol ir she'im ba'asara dvarim halalu, ein talmid chacham rashai ladur b'tocha. Any city that does not have the following 10 things, a righteous person, a Torah scholar, I should say, cannot reside in that city. And one of those things is kupa shel tzedakah nigbeit b'shnayim mitchaleket b'shlosha, right? A communal trust, a charity collecting, okay? Which is a charity which is collected by 2 and distributed by 3, all right? There has to be a communal trust from which charity is disseminated, and people to administer it. And if that doesn't exist, don't go there, right? So that, I think, also kind of bespeaks a certain baseline morality. That is true. But nonetheless, tzedakah the concept of coercion in tzedakah did exist. It did exist. And much of the discussion really does center around this passage in the Tosefta, in source number 5. when I give, right, this is kind of a practical question as well. When I decide to give tzedakah, okay, so how much of a leeway, how much of a right do I have to channel my funds to the causes that I want, right? Or is it the authorities, the tzedakah authorities, the gabbai tzedakah, the collectors, tzedakah collectors, should they decide, right? So let's use taxes as an example. Everyone would agree that in theory, my giving money to the government is potentially a good thing. They're going to use that money for good things. They're going to defend the homeland. They're going to provide a safety net for those who need money.
They're going to steal it.
They're going to build roads. They're going to build bridges.
Give it
Okay.
to their brother-in-law. Yeah.
Okay. So now the question is: do I, as a citizen, as a charity giver, let's not say a taxpayer, let's say as a charity giver, do I have a right when I pay into that fund? Do I have a right to determine where that money goes? Should I say, you know what? I really care about roads and bridges, and that people should get around. I want my donation, quote unquote, to go to those causes. Okay, right?
Well, they're different things. I mean, charity is something which you give, and you have a right to say where you want it to go.
Okay.
But where you have government authorities and so on, you can't compare it. I mean, they will decide. You can't say where it goes.
Right. So on some level, that's certainly true. But I was using the model of taxes because that was why I prefaced the remark with that. I think that it's the government would tell you that on some level the paying of taxes is almost like charitable giving, right? And did anyone ever wonder why there's a charitable deduction on our taxes? Why does that even exist?
To encourage
the government doesn't
people
do a
to-
lot of things, and this is a way of subsidizing the non-governmental organizations or our tax exempt charities who do things that the government don't. For example, in this country, there are lots of needs that are not met.
Exactly.
Because our social programs aren't that big, and there's a reliance on these charities to do so. So to encourage people to give to those charities.
So in theory, in other words, it's the validation of the government of charitable giving because these are things that they know should be done and things perhaps in theory they think they should do or have a responsibility to do, but know that they can't, so they entrust us to do it instead of them. Okay?
And private charity is more efficient than government charity.
Amen. Right? So that's right. So many have written about this, but in a truly, the United States of America is not a fully capitalist society, but that's why in a free market system, faith-based organizations are so important because, it's through vehicles other than the government that we believe that the needy should be taken care of. I think there's kind of this demagoguery that goes on this is about as political I'll get in this conversation, but there's kind of this demagoguery that goes on, on both sides, but really people who say like, free market people don't care about the poor, right? And you hear that all the time, right? And it's, I think what those free market people would tell you is we care very much about the poor, but we just don't think the government is the vehicle through which the poor should be taken care of, right? It should be charitable organizations, faith-based organizations, go to your church or your synagogue or your mosque, and
Much more efficient.
anyway, so on some level that's certainly true. Either way, so to what extent is that true? So if you look at source number 5, the Tosefta presents the following case. The Tosefta says, Yachid shepasak tzedakah be'iro, nosna la'aniyeh iro, be'ir acheres nosna la'aniyeh ir acheres, right? So if you set aside tzedakah in your town, it goes to the people in your town. If you set aside tzedakah in another town, it goes to the people in the other town. Haparnasin shepasku tzedakah be'iran notnin la'iran, be'ir acher notnin la'aniyeh acher. Same thing with the tzedakah collectors. If you collect in one town, you give to the people in that town, the other town, you give to the people in the other town. Now is our case. Haposek tzedakah, if someone sets aside or pledges money for tzedakah, ad shelo zachuba haparnasin, rashai lishanotal davar acher. If I pledge money, so long as it has not yet been collected by the authorities, I have a right to divert those funds to other causes. Okay? Misha zachuba haparnasin, but once the authorities have collected the money, Ein rashai leshanot levar acher ela midatan. Whose right is it at that point to change the mind of where that money's going to go? It's their right, no longer my right. Okay? So the concept of a communal trust that's administered and that's decided upon by people does exist, right? And on some level, the concept of coercion, we're not going to go through all the sources, but suffice it to say, the notion that there is this gabbai tzedakah that has a right to go around and force you, coerce you, compel you to give charity does exist. It is true, right? And if it's true, I guess we're left wondering, how could I force you to give something that is that's like a moral obligation? How could I force you to give something that's yours, that you're giving out of the goodness of your own heart because you're a good person? If I'm forcing you to give it, how does that make you a good person, right? Those two things are almost paradoxical, right? If I have to force you to do something, that makes you actually not a good person, right? Isn't it almost by definition that, right? So that's kind of the question that we're left with. And we're going to continue in developing this idea next week when we talk about competition in the marketplace. Next week, we're going to get a little bit into the free market aspect of this entire discussion. To what extent does Jewish law permit or even encourage / advocate free markets, competition in the marketplace, right? If I own a pizza shop, right?
Open one down.
Can I open one down?
Time for you.
Yeah. So that's the question,
Yeah.
right? And we're going to talk a little bit about that's more of a free market question, which we're going to get to. Yeah.
But the coercion of here is just a matter of, I think it's not in keeping with the concept of charity by the Torah. It's just a practical event to get it. The practical action sometimes
Necessary.
wipes out philosophical arguments. Like coercion. I mean, like look at synagogue dues. I mean, this is a coercion, and it's incredibly the amount they take out nowadays. So, but this is coercion. So it doesn't follow.
They gotta pay off the building fund, right?
That's what I'm saying. So philosophy sometimes bends to practicality.
That's true. Philosophy does sometimes bend to practicality. That is true. Yeah.
The other thing I wanted to mention about collective administration of these funds is twofold. First of all, if you have a kind of a collection that compelled is kind of an ugly word, but if you have a standardized collection, it relieves people of the responsibility in many instances of thinking, gee, what can I afford, what can I do? The collector is going to suggest something for you, okay? That relieves you. And also, if you're going around each and every house, you don't know who had to have their own twist and who didn't. You know, it kind of levels the playing field in terms of what's my neighbor doing, how's that going?
Interesting.
And going to every house. And also, there are people who need, but you don't necessarily know that they need. So the, like JCCs or the neighborhood things, they may know that a family is in really food insecurity and their neighbors would never know it. You know, they just wouldn't know it. And so if you were looking for someone to give charity, you wouldn't give to them, but the JCC would know, or the community group would know.
So at least that last point certainly explains why we need a communal fund. That last point at least doesn't necessarily explain the compulsory aspect of it, but I definitely agree that a lot of the kind of the middlemen very often alleviates some of that stress and tension that exists in society. I want to drive this point home with a comment of the Rambam. We're going to do sources 10 and 11, and then we're going to continue next week. So the Rambam in source 10, this is the very end of the laws Hilchot Nachalot, which is the laws of inheritance. And the Rambam there says, he talks about an apotropos. An apotropos is a guardian, if you will. Someone who's been appointed to take care of a child's estate. A child's parents die young, and they're given this estate, and they're little. They don't know. So the court appoints an apotropos, a guardian, a watch person, if you will, to take care of their estate. So ha'apotropin osin l'ketanim lulav v'sukkah v'tzitzis v'shofar sefer Torah tefillin mezuzos Megillah. Okay, it is the guardian's responsibility to set aside funds for all of these ritual items: a sukkah and a lulav and a shofar, a sefer Torah, tefillin, mezuzah, Megillah, all those things. Okay, klalo shel davar. What is the general rule of thumb? Kol mitzvot aseh sheyesh lahem kitzvah, bein shum midivrei Torah, bein shum midivrei sofrim, osin lahem. Right, the guardian should do the mitzvot which are of fixed amount. Right, even if they're not obligated, Nonetheless, we do them so that they can be educated. That's what the Rambam says. However, aval ein poskin alehen tzedakah afilu lepidyon shvuyim. The guardian, who's the guardian of this estate, does not have the power, and should not, for that matter, set aside funds for tzedakah. Mipnei shemitzvot elu ein lahem kitzvah. Because tzedakah has no limit, right? There's no limit as to how much you can give, how much you should give, okay? Whether that's in fact fully true is a good question, which we're not going to get to right now. But then the Rambam adds off, umisha nishtateh o nitcharesh, beit din poskin alav tzedakah hayara'ui. Let's say someone was a healthy person, and then they go insane. They become clinically insane, and no longer have their faculties about them. There, the courts, the authorities come in, and they set aside from that person's estate tzedakah money. Okay? What's the obvious question?
The obvious question is that they're fighting against a person's will, they have no capacity to agree to that.
Right. So that's certainly true. But in juxtaposing these two laws, what's the Rambam doing? It's creating an inherent contradiction. If it is inherently good for someone to give tzedakah, so much so that when someone doesn't have their faculties, when someone isn't fully there, we're willing to go in and dip into their bank account to set aside tzedakah, why aren't we also willing to do that for the child? Okay? If he has the money, in both instances we should do that. What's the difference? What's the difference?
Well, the child isn't obligated to give stuff to give tzedakah because he's not an adult. I mean,
so a shoteh, someone who's insane, is not obligated in any of the mitzvot.
he's not obligated either, but he's in a sense half dead.
So I want to answer the question with a remarkable comment offered by the Kesef Mishnah, Rav Yosef Karo, okay, in source number 11, okay. Because the Kesef Mishnah seeks to explain exactly why this is. Why is it that someone, and the Rambam was very precise. What is the language that the Rambam used to describe such a person? Misha nishtateh. What does that mean? Someone who went insane.
Okay. It wasn't that way from
Correct.
day one.
All right.
If it had been that way from day one, arguably it would be a different
Correct.
result.
Okay. So it says the Kesef Mishnah. Ve'efshar lomar. We could explain the Rambam by saying Shatam Rabbeinu Mishum. The reason why the Rambam says this is okay. A person, every person is inherently a good person, right? The concept of coercion, says the Rambam, as explained by the Kesef Mishnah, says the Rambam here, the concept of coercion isn't really coercion. Do you know what it is? It's making you be a good person, a moral person, an upstanding citizen. Okay? So I'm not forcing you to do this to restore justice to the world. I'm forcing you to do this because you're a good person, and we as a society have a right to expect that you're going to live like a good person, that you're going to fulfill your moral obligation. And every person deep down in the inner recesses of their heart wants to be a good person and wants to give tzedakah from their money, even a person who goes insane, whose thoughts and motivations and intentions we can't fully know. All things being equal, at the end of the day, your regular, run-of-the-mill, standard citizen of the world, member of the Jewish people, wants to give tzedakah. And therefore, if they were sane and now they're insane, we can assume that when they were a good person, the thought had occurred to them to give tzedakah. And that's why we can do what we do. And this model, I think, is very helpful. And we didn't go through all of the sources, but many sources which deal with the concept of coercion in tzedakah, we can approach it in this sort of way. Coercion in and of itself is not the substance of the law. There are many areas of halacha. There are capital cases, and there are monetary cases, and there are ritual cases, and right? There are all sorts of things, right? Coercion can and even sometimes does exist in all of those areas. So the fact that I coerce you to do something doesn't make it a juridical point. It could still be a moral point. Coercion means that we have certain expectations of you. That's what that means. If you're a member of the Jewish people, we expect that you act like a Jew. You act like someone who's Mizera Avram Avinu. And that sometimes means that we have expectations of you and you have to meet those expectations. And if not, we can sometimes force you to do that. Next week, we'll get a little bit into more of the nitty-gritty. We'll talk about competition in the marketplace with a little bit having to do with markets and finances. We'll get a little bit into interest and money lending. And the following week, I want to spend some time on healthcare. Okay, those will be our next 2 weeks. Looking forward to seeing everyone next week, and have a great day.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.